You're too rigid for modern warfare. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 35 years old, and I've been managing military logistics for 12 years. I just handed Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone a detailed report showing $4.3 million in missing equipment. And that was his response. The air conditioning hummed in his office at Camp Bighorn, Chad. Outside, the desert heat shimmered off the tarmac where transport planes loaded and unloaded supplies bound for operations across the Sahel region. Inside, Stone leaned back in his chair, like I'd just told him the weather forecast. Flexible soldiers understand necessary compromises, he continued, not even looking at the spreadsheets I'd spent 3 weeks compiling. I kept my face neutral. 12 years in the Army teaches you when to speak and when to stay quiet. This was a staying quiet moment. But something cold settled in my stomach as I watched him dismiss months of missing night vision equipment, encrypted communication units, and replacement parts that had vanished from our inventory without explanation. Is that all, Sergeant Cole? Yes, sir. Dismissed. I saluted, turned, and walked out. My boots echoed down the corridor, past the supply offices where I'd spent the last 6 months tracking every piece of equipment that moved through our base. Each footstep felt heavier than the last. Back in the quartermaster's office, I sat at my desk and stared at the computer screen. The numbers didn't lie. Every missing item had been processed through Stone's authorization codes. Every discrepancy traced back to the same pattern. Equipment marked as transferred or combat loss that had never left the wire, never seen action, never been damaged. Specialist Rivera walked by, carrying a requisition form. Working late again, Sergeant? Just finishing up some paperwork. She nodded and kept walking. Good kid. Reminded me of myself when I first enlisted. Back when I thought following the rules meant something. Back when I believed the system protected the people who did their jobs right. I pulled up the classified communication portal on my computer. The cursor blinked in the empty message field. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Outside, a convoy rumbled past the window, heading out on another supply run. Same trucks I'd loaded with gear that would somehow disappear from the manifests before they reached their destination. Same drivers who trusted that the equipment they carried would make it to the soldiers who needed it. I started typing. The Criminal Investigation Division needed to know what I'd found. Not because I wanted to destroy Stone's career, but because soldiers in the field deserved better than compromised supply lines and missing gear that might save their lives. What I didn't know was that Stone had already decided I was a problem worth solving. I joined the Army right out of high school in Bozeman, Montana. My dad worked construction, and my mom taught elementary school. Neither of them understood why I wanted the military, but they supported me anyway. Just do your best, my mom said, when I shipped out to basic training. That's all anyone can ask. Turned out doing my best meant becoming the guy everyone called when supplies went missing or paperwork didn't add up. I had a talent for seeing patterns others missed, for tracking equipment through the maze of military bureaucracy. After my first deployment to Chad, Iraq, my commanding officer recommended me for logistics training. You've got a gift for this work, Cole, he said. The Army needs soldiers who can keep track of things. Over the years, I'd served in Syria, then Kuwait, and now Central Africa. I'd managed supply chains for forward operating bases, tracked millions of dollars in equipment, and built a reputation for accuracy. Other logistics officers called me by the book, but it wasn't about rigid thinking. It was about accountability. When soldiers needed ammunition, medical supplies, or communication gear, there wasn't room for errors. Lieutenant Colonel Stone had taken command of our logistics section 3 months ago, transferred in from a desk job at the Pentagon. He was smooth, political, the kind of officer who spoke in budget meetings and knew which contractors got the best deals. The enlisted soldiers respected him because he promised efficiency improvements and faster supply deliveries. But I'd started noticing problems almost immediately. Equipment would be logged as transferred to units that had never requested it. High-value items would disappear from secure storage and reappear weeks later in different accounting categories. When I asked questions, Stone would smile and say he was streamlining processes and eliminating redundancies. The breaking point came when I cross-referenced our inventory reports with actual unit requests. We'd shipped 20 sets of night vision goggles to a forward base in Nigeria that had never filed a requisition. When I contacted the unit directly, their supply sergeant told me they'd never received any night vision equipment. That's when I started building the real picture. I began copying files, taking screenshots, and documenting every discrepancy. I interviewed soldiers who'd handled the shipments, checked manifests against delivery confirmations, and traced the authorization codes back to their sources. The pattern was unmistakable. Stone was funneling equipment to private contractors operating in the region. The night before I confronted him, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my soldiers in the field, the ones who trusted that their gear would work when they needed it most. I thought about my dad, who'd taught me that a man's word was his bond, and my mom, who'd always said doing the right thing wasn't about recognition. I filed my classified report at 0300 hours. By 0600, I was walking into Stone's office with my summary. 24 hours after Stone dismissed my report, I received official discharge papers. I sat in my quarters, reading the charges: conduct unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer, and insubordination to a superior officer. The paperwork cited my inability to adapt to evolving operational requirements and persistent questioning of command decisions that undermined unit cohesion. None of it mentioned the missing equipment. None of it referenced my report. It was as if the conversation in Stone's office had never happened. Specialist Rivera knocked on my door. "Sergeant Cole, the colonel wants to see you." I walked back to his office knowing what was coming. Stone sat behind his desk with the base commander, Colonel Diana Hayes, and the unit's legal officer. 3 sets of eyes watched me enter. "Sergeant Cole," Colonel Hayes began, "your service record shows commendable performance over 12 years. However, recent concerns about your adaptability to command structure have raised questions about your continued effectiveness in this unit." She paused. "Ma'am, you're being discharged under Article 15 for conduct unbecoming. You'll be processed out within 48 hours. I looked at Stone. He met my eyes without flinching, his expression calm and professional. Behind him, a framed photo showed him shaking hands with a Pentagon official at some ceremony I'd never heard of. "Do I have the right to appeal this decision?" "You do," the legal officer said. "However, given the circumstances and the need for unit stability, Command recommends accepting the discharge and moving forward." Translation: "Fight this, and we'll make it worse." I nodded. "Understood." "You've served with honor, Sergeant," Colonel Hayes said. "This is unfortunate, but sometimes soldiers and commands aren't the right fit." I saluted and left. In the hallway, I passed the supply office where Rivera was updating inventory logs. She looked up as I walked by, confusion clear on her face. She'd probably heard rumors already. Word traveled fast on a small base. Back in my quarters, I packed my gear methodically. 12 years of service fit into 2 duffel bags and a footlocker. I folded my uniforms, wrapped my awards, and sealed my personal items. Each piece felt heavier than it should have, but something had shifted inside me during that meeting. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something colder, more focused. Stone thought he'd solved his problem by getting rid of me. He thought eliminating the messenger would silence the message. He was wrong. My classified report was already in the system, uploaded to servers beyond his reach. The Criminal Investigation Division didn't answer to logistics colonels or base commanders. They answered to federal law and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I'd followed the rules, documented everything, and trusted the process. Now, I had to wait and see if the system I'd served for 12 years would protect the integrity I'd tried to maintain. Outside my window, another convoy was forming up for departure. The discharge process moved faster than I expected. Within 12 hours, my security clearances were suspended. My access to logistics systems was terminated. The military police escorted me through the base to collect my final paperwork, as if I might steal something on my way out. Rivera caught up with me outside the administrative building. "Sergeant, what's happening? Nobody's explaining anything." "Orders change," I said. "You know how it is." She frowned. "This doesn't feel right. You've been our best logistics officer. The inventory's never been cleaner." I wanted to tell her to keep her head down, to not ask questions that might get her in trouble. But she deserved better than that. "Just keep doing your job, Rivera. Document everything. Trust the process." She nodded, though I could see she didn't understand. How could she? From her perspective, a competent sergeant had suddenly been labeled insubordinate and shipped home. The Army didn't usually explain itself to specialists. That afternoon, I sat in the passenger terminal waiting for my flight to Frankfurt, then Denver, then home to Montana. The base continued its operations around me, planes landing and taking off, convoys moving in and out, soldiers going about their duties. Life moved forward like I'd never been there. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Heard you're coming home. Everything okay?" I typed back. "Fine. Just time for a change." The lie came easily. What else could I say? That I'd discovered my commanding officer was stealing millions in military equipment? That the Army had discharged me rather than investigate? That 12 years of service had ended with an escort to the airport? A captain I didn't recognize sat down across from me in the terminal. "Sergeant Cole." "Yes, sir." "Captain Miller, Criminal Investigation Division." He kept his voice low. "I understand you filed a report regarding inventory discrepancies." My pulse quickened. "Yes, sir. We've initiated a preliminary review based on your submission. The evidence you provided is comprehensive." He handed me a business card. "If you think of anything else, contact me directly." I looked at the card. Standard military contact information, but with a secure communication number. "What happens now?" "Now, you go home. Let us handle the investigation." His expression was neutral, professional. "Sergeant, you did the right thing." Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we expect. He left without another word. I sat in the terminal for another 2 hours, watching planes take off and land, thinking about what Captain Miller had said. The investigation was moving forward. Stone hadn't killed it by discharging me, but the cost was real. 12 years of military service ended not with a retirement ceremony or achievement recognition, but with an escort to the airport and questions about my character. My personnel file would forever show a discharge for conduct unbecoming. Future employers would see that notation and wonder what I'd done wrong. The flight to Frankfurt was half empty. I sat in the back, watching Africa disappear below the clouds. Somewhere down there, Stone was probably congratulating himself on solving his problem cleanly. No investigation, no publicity, no questions from higher command. Just a troublesome sergeant removed from the equation. He was wrong, but he didn't know it yet. In Frankfurt, I had a 6-hour layover. I found a quiet corner of the terminal and had opened my laptop. Using the airport's Wi-Fi, I logged into my personal email and found a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." The message was from a sergeant first class stationed in Jordan. Heard through channels that you flagged some equipment issues in Central Africa. Wanted you to know that kind of integrity matters to those of us still downrange. Stay strong. I stared at the screen. Word was already spreading through the logistics community. Other soldiers knew what had happened, even if they couldn't talk about it openly. The network of non-commissioned officers who kept the army running had their own communication channels, their own way of sharing information that mattered. I closed the laptop and boarded my flight to Denver. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I made a decision. The army had discharged me, but that didn't mean I was done fighting. 3 weeks after returning to Bozeman, I received a call from Captain Miller. "Sergeant Cole, we need to talk. Can you meet me in Denver tomorrow?" "What's this about?" "Your report opened a bigger investigation than we initially expected. We've uncovered evidence of a systematic conspiracy involving multiple contractors and at least 6 military installations across 3 continents. I drove to Denver the next morning, my mind racing through possibilities. The Criminal Investigation Division offices were located in a nondescript federal building downtown. Miller met me in the lobby and escorted me to a secure conference room where 2 other investigators waited. "Sergeant Cole, this is Agent Rebecca Foster from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service and Colonel James Mitchell from Army Criminal Investigation Command." Miller gestured to chairs around a polished table. "What we're about to discuss is classified." I sat down, waiting. Agent Foster opened a thick folder. "Your initial report identified $4.3 million in missing equipment from Camp Bighorn. Our investigation has traced those items to a network of private military contractors operating across Central Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe." She spread photographs across the table, night vision equipment, communication gear, and weapon accessories I recognized from our inventory. But these photos showed the equipment in different hands, different locations, different contexts. "This gear was photographed at contractor facilities in Uganda, Oman, and Romania," Colonel Mitchell explained. "We've identified the purchasing chain. Military equipment stolen from official inventory, sold to intermediary companies, then resold to private contractors at significant markup." "How much are we talking about?" "Conservatively, $47 million over the past 18 months, Miller said. Lieutenant Colonel Stone was a key facilitator, but not the only one. We've identified similar operations at bases in Qatar, Jordan, Italy, and South Korea. Agent Foster pulled out another set of documents. Stone had connections to Kiet Blackwood Advisory Group, a consulting firm that specializes in defense contracts. They brokered deals between military logistics officers and private contractors who needed equipment quickly without going through official procurement channels. The scope was staggering. I'd thought I was reporting one corrupt officer stealing from one base. Instead, I'd uncovered an international conspiracy that spanned multiple branches of the military and involved dozens of participants. What's Stone's status? Still at Camp Bighorn, still commanding the logistics section, Colonel Mitchell said. He doesn't know we're investigating him. We need to build an airtight case before we move. What about my discharge? Miller exchanged glances with the others. That's complicated. Your discharge was technically legal under military law. Stone had the authority to remove you for insubordination. Fighting it would require proving that the insubordination charge was retaliatory, which would expose the ongoing investigation. So I stay discharged while you build your case? For now, yes. Agent Foster leaned forward. But there's something else. We want to offer you a position as a consultant on this investigation. Your knowledge of military logistics and inventory systems is exactly what we need to trace the full extent of the conspiracy. I studied their faces. Serious, professional, committed to seeing this through. These were people who understood that integrity mattered, that soldiers in combat zones deserved equipment they could trust. What would that involve? Analyzing financial records, reviewing inventory systems at other installations, helping us understand how the theft mechanisms worked, Colonel Mitchell explained. It would be classified work, well compensated, and it would give you a chance to see this through to completion. Outside the conference room windows, Denver traffic moved through downtown streets. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that military equipment meant to protect American soldiers was being sold to the highest bidder. When do I start? The consulting work began immediately. Within a week, I was analyzing logistics records from 6 different military installations, looking for patterns similar to what I'd found at Camp Bighorn. The Criminal Investigation Division set me up with a secure workspace in a federal building in Denver, complete with classified computer systems and direct communication lines to investigators across the globe. The deeper I dug, the more sophisticated the conspiracy became. Stone and his associates had developed a system of falsified transfer orders, manipulated inventory counts, and fabricated combat loss reports that made stolen equipment disappear from official records. They'd been operating for at least 3 years, possibly longer. Agent Foster called me into her office after I'd been working for 2 weeks. "We've made our first arrest." She handed me a classified briefing document. A logistics officer at Vogelway Garrison in Germany had been taken into custody for equipment theft. The arrest was based on financial records showing unexplained deposits totaling over $200,000. How did you track the money? Your recommendation to analyze bank records from military personnel with access to high-value inventory. We cross-referenced unusual deposits with equipment shortages and found direct correlations. She smiled. Your logistics background is proving invaluable. The investigation accelerated over the following month. We identified 16 military personnel involved in the conspiracy, including 2 lieutenant colonels, 6 majors, and 9 non-commissioned officers. The network stretched from junior enlisted soldiers who falsified paperwork to senior officers who authorized fraudulent transfers. But Stone remained untouched. He continued commanding the logistics section at Camp Bighorn, unaware that his communications were being monitored and his financial records were under microscopic examination. Miller brought me surveillance photographs from Chad. Stone, meeting with civilian contractors at restaurants off base. Stone, transferring files to unmarked thumb drives. Stone, conducting conversations in his personal vehicle away from official monitoring. "We need to time this perfectly," Miller explained. "If we arrest him too early, we lose the opportunity to gather evidence on his higher-level contacts. If we wait too long, he might realize we're closing in and destroy evidence." What's the timeline? 2 weeks. We've identified a major equipment transfer scheduled for next month. Night vision systems worth over $3 million, supposedly bound for a training facility in Chados, Tanzania. We want to catch him in the act of authorizing the fraudulent transfer. I reviewed the operation plan: simultaneous arrests across multiple countries, coordinated seizure of financial records, and complete dismantling of the conspiracy network. The investigation I'd started with a single report had grown into one of the largest military corruption cases in decades. My phone rang that evening. My mom's voice sounded tired. "Ethan, your dad's been asking when you're coming home. He wants to know what you're doing in Denver. Contract work, Mom. Government consulting. Is everything all right? You sound different. I looked out the window of my temporary apartment at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, soldiers were trusting their lives to equipment that might or might not be where it was supposed to. Somewhere else, contractors were profiting from betraying that trust. Everything's fine, Mom. I'm just working on something important. Well, be careful. And remember what I always told you. Do your best. That's all anyone can ask. That's right. After I hung up, I returned to my laptop and continued analyzing financial records. In 2 weeks, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone would discover that doing your best sometimes meant accepting consequences you never saw coming. The system was finally working the way it was supposed to. The arrest happened at 6:00 a.m. CUS, local time across 4 different time zones. I watched from the Criminal Investigation Division's Operations Center in Denver as reports came in from around the world. At Camp Bighorn Shores, military police entered Stone's quarters and placed him under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft of government property. His computer was seized, his personal effects cataloged, and his security clearances immediately revoked. Simultaneously, federal agents raided the offices of Blackwood Advisory Group in Washington, seizing servers and financial records. In fact, Tanzania, local authorities arrested 3 private contractors who'd been purchasing stolen military equipment. In Germany, Jordan, and South Korea, additional military personnel were taken into custody. Agent Foster stood beside me, watching the operation unfold on multiple screens. $47 million in stolen equipment, 17 military personnel involved, and a conspiracy that reached from junior enlisted soldiers to Pentagon contractors. Your report made all of this possible. On one screen, I watched footage from Camp Bighorn as Stone was escorted to a transport vehicle in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, less authoritative without his uniform and rank insignia. Just a man who'd traded his honor for money and been caught doing it. Miller joined us at the observation station. The evidence is overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony, and physical recovery of stolen equipment. The military prosecutors estimate conviction rates above 90% for all defendants. I thought about Specialista Rivera and the other soldiers still serving at a Camp Bighorn, still trusting that their equipment would be there when they needed it. The conspiracy was finished, but rebuilding trust would take time. What happens to the stolen equipment? Everything we can recover goes back into official inventory, Foster explained. Some items are too compromised or damaged, but most of the night vision systems, communication gear, and weapons accessories can be returned to active service. On another screen, news footage showed congressional leaders announcing the investigation results. The story would dominate military news for weeks, but the details would remain classified. The soldiers who'd risked their lives with compromised equipment would probably never know how close they'd come to disaster. Stone's arrest was the culmination of 6 months of investigation, but it felt quieter than I'd expected. No dramatic confrontation, no moment of recognition, just professional law enforcement officers doing their jobs with precision and thoroughness. The system had worked, slowly, methodically, but completely. 3 months later, I received an offer I hadn't expected. Colonel Mitchell called me into his office at the federal building. Ethan, we've been impressed with your work on this investigation. Your ability to analyze complex logistics systems and identify fraud patterns is exactly what we need for future operations. He handed me a formal job offer from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, senior analyst position based in Denver, with a focus on military supply chain security and fraud prevention. "We want you to help us build better systems," he explained. "Protocols that make it harder for future conspiracies to develop. Training programs for logistics officers. Rapid response capabilities for investigating equipment theft." I studied the offer letter. Good salary, federal benefits, and the opportunity to protect the integrity of military supply chains. The work would be challenging, important, and directly connected to soldier safety. "There's one other thing," Colonel Mitchell added. "The Army is reviewing your discharge. Given the circumstances and the value of your service to this investigation, there's a strong possibility your personnel record will be corrected." I thought about my dad, still working construction in Bozeman, still believing that a man's word was his bond. I thought about my mom, who'd taught me that doing your best was all anyone could ask. They'd be proud of how this ended, even if they never learned the full story. Outside the office windows, Denver stretched toward the mountains. Somewhere out there, soldiers were loading equipment for deployment, trusting that their gear would work when they needed it most. The conspiracy was finished, but the work of protecting that trust continued. I signed the offer letter. 2 weeks later, I started my new position, building the systems that would prevent future corruption. The work was important, challenging, and exactly what I'd trained for during 12 years of military service. The discharge still bothered me sometimes, but I'd learned that integrity wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the right thing, even when it cost more than you expected to pay.